The polished marble floors of the courthouse reflected a man who believed he owned the world and everyone in it. Arthur Sterling, the tech billionaire, whose face graced magazine covers, walked in not with an air of concern, but with the triumphant strut of a victor. On his arm was Serafina Vance, his much younger mistress, draped in designer clothes and flashing a smile for the paparazzi. They were a portrait of unapologetic arrogance. His wife, Alara, sat alone, a ghost in a simple dress. Arthur's plan was simple: publicly humiliate her, claim their children weren't his, and leave her with nothing. He smiled, ready for his performance. But he didn't know one thing. The woman on the bench, Judge Evelyn Reed, wasn't looking at him. She was looking at a sealed manila envelope on her desk, an envelope that held the one truth he thought was buried forever. The Sterling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, wasn't a home. It was a monument to wealth, a sprawling 30,000 square foot behemoth of limestone and glass overlooking the Long Island Sound. Alara Sterling had once thought it was a palace, a fairy tale come to life. 15 years of marriage to Arthur Sterling had taught her the truth. It was a gilded cage, and the bars were forged from his control. Their life, once a whirlwind of genuine affection and shared dreams, had slowly curdled. Arthur, the ambitious founder of Ether Dynamics, had transformed from a driven partner into a tyrannical monarch. His love became conditional, his compliments were transactions, and his affection was a weapon he wielded to ensure her compliance. Alara, once a promising art historian, had been reduced to the role of Mrs. Sterling, a beautiful, silent accessory whose primary function was to run his perfect household and raise his perfect children, 12-year-old Liam and 10-year-old Chloe. The children were her world, the only sources of warmth in the cavernous, cold mansion. Liam, with his father's sharp eyes but her gentle nature, was a budding scientist, his room a chaotic mess of wires and half-finished gadgets. Chloe was her mother's daughter, a dreamer with a sketchbook always in hand, her pages filled with fantastical creatures and vibrant landscapes so different from their sterile reality. They were the reason Alara endured the silent dinners, the public snubs, the chilling indifference in her husband's eyes. The affair wasn't a secret. Not really. Arthur wasn't clumsy. He was brazen. Serafina Vance was a 24-year-old Instagram model and influencer, a woman whose entire existence seemed curated for public consumption. She was everything Alara was not: loud, ostentatious, and utterly devoid of the quiet grace that had once drawn Arthur to his wife. Their liaisons weren't whispered about in shadowy corners. They were flaunted. Paparazzi photos of them dining in Paris, yachting in Monaco, laughing on the red carpet of a film premiere he'd attended without his wife. Each photo was a deliberate, calculated stab at Alara's heart. Arthur wanted her to see. He wanted her to feel powerless. He wanted her to know her place had been taken. Alara tried to confront him once. It was late, the house silent save for the hum of the climate control. He had just returned from a business trip to St. Bart's, his skin tan, smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers. "Arthur, we need to talk about this," she began, her voice trembling slightly as she stood in the doorway of their cavernous master bedroom. He didn't even look up from his tablet, where he was scrolling through stock prices. "Talk about what, Alara? The charity gala next month? Your budget has been approved." "No, about her, about Serafina." He finally lowered the tablet, his gaze as cold and hard as a diamond. "What about her? She's a pleasant distraction. You should try getting one." The cruelty of it knocked the air from her lungs. "She's not a distraction, Arthur. You're destroying our family. You're destroying us." He stood up, walking towards her. He wasn't yelling. He never yelled. His control was absolute. He stopped just before her, invading her personal space. "Let me be perfectly clear," he said, his voice a low, menacing whisper. "There is no us. There is my company, my reputation, and my life. You and the children are a part of that life, a part that I expect to run smoothly. You have everything you could ever want. Do not create problems where none exist. Do you understand?" She didn't answer, a tear tracing a silent path down her cheek. He took that as a yes. He brushed past her, heading for his private dressing room. The conversation was over. She was dismissed. The final shattering blow came not in the privacy of their cold mansion, but in the glaring light of public opinion. It was a Tuesday morning. Elara was in the sunroom helping Chloe with a school project on the solar system when her phone began to buzz incessantly. A text from her sister, then another from a friend, all with the same link to a celebrity gossip website. The headline screamed, "Tech titan Arthur Sterling to divorce wife of 15 years. Sources say he's finally free to be with influencer Serafina Vance." Beneath it was a photo of Arthur and Serafina leaving a high-end restaurant the night before, his arm wrapped possessively around her, both of them laughing. The article was a masterpiece of character assassination, filled with anonymous quotes from sources close to the couple. It painted Arthur as a long-suffering husband, trapped in a loveless marriage with a cold, social-climbing woman who was only after his money. It painted Elara as a relic of his past, someone he had outgrown. Her hands shook as she read the words. He hadn't even had the decency to tell her. He had announced it to the world, letting her find out alongside millions of strangers. An hour later, a sleek black car pulled up the long, winding driveway. It wasn't Arthur. A man in a sharp suit, a legal courier, stepped out. He approached the front door where the housekeeper let him in. He asked for Mrs. Sterling. Standing in the grand foyer, under a chandelier that cost more than her childhood home, Elara Sterling was served with divorce papers. The courier was professional, detached. He handed her the thick stack of documents, requested a signature confirming receipt, and left as quietly as he had arrived. She sank onto the bottom step of the grand staircase, the cold marble seeping through her clothes. She opened the folder. The legal jargon was dense, but the intent was brutally clear. He was filing for sole custody of the children, and he was contesting the prenuptial agreement. His grounds were shocking in their audacity. The petition contained a clause that made her blood run cold. Furthermore, the plaintiff, Arthur Sterling, has reason to believe he is not the biological father of the children, Liam Sterling and Chloe Sterling, and will be demanding a court-ordered paternity test to verify parentage. Upon confirmation, he will seek to have all parental rights and financial obligations terminated. It was a lie, a monstrous, venomous lie designed for one purpose: to obliterate her. He knew she had no family money, no career to fall back on. By claiming the children weren't his, he was trying to strip her of everything, not just her wealth, but her identity as a mother, her very reason for being. He wanted to leave her broken, destitute, and utterly alone. In that moment, something inside Elara shifted. The fear that had paralyzed her for years began to harden into something else. It was a cold, quiet rage. He thought he was playing a game of chess, and he had just declared checkmate. But he had made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed she was just a pawn. He had no idea she had a secret of her own, a truth so fundamental, so devastating, that it would not just change the game, it would shatter the entire board. She stood up, the papers clutched in her hand. The gilded cage had been broken open, but she wasn't going to fly away scared. She was going to walk out and burn it to the ground. Arthur Sterling's legal team was the stuff of legend in New York City. The law firm of Whitman, Price & Gable occupied 3 floors of a skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. They were sharks in $1,000 suits, known for burying opponents in paperwork and bleeding them dry with procedural delays. They represented corporations, oligarchs, and billionaires like Arthur. They never lost. Elara, by contrast, walked into the modest, book-lined office of Marcus Thorne. Thorne & Associates was a small boutique firm in a less glamorous part of town. Marcus Thorne wasn't a celebrity lawyer. He was in his late 40s, with a slightly rumpled suit, kind eyes, and a reputation for being a tenacious fighter for the underdog. He specialized in complex family law, often taking cases the big firms wouldn't touch because they weren't easy or profitable enough. Elara had been referred to him by a friend from a women's shelter she had secretly volunteered at for years. She sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, and laid out the story. She spoke of the emotional abuse, the public humiliation, and finally the divorce petition. When she got to the part about the paternity claim, Marcus leaned forward, his expression hardening. "It's a classic scorched earth tactic, Elara," he said, his voice calm but firm. He's not just trying to divorce you, he's trying to erase you. By questioning the children's paternity, he attacks your character, isolates you from your social circle, and creates leverage to force you into a pathetic settlement. He wants you to be so ashamed and so terrified of losing your children that you'll sign anything he puts in front of you. But it's a lie, Alara whispered, her voice cracking. He knows it's a lie. Truth is a flexible concept for men like Arthur Sterling, Marcus replied grimly. In his world, truth is whatever he can pay to make people believe. He'll hire PIs to dig for any hint of infidelity in your past. He'll leak stories. He'll paint you as an unfaithful monster. The court of public opinion will convict you long before we ever see a judge. Alara looked down at her hands, then back up at him, her eyes holding a new steely resolve. That's why I came to you, Marcus. He thinks he knows everything. He thinks he's in complete control, but there's something he doesn't know that I know. Marcus raised an eyebrow, waiting. Alara took a deep breath. This was it. The secret she had carried alone for over a decade. The truth she had guarded to protect her husband's pride, his fragile ego, his public image. The same pride he was now using to destroy her. Early in our marriage, she began, her voice low and steady. We tried to have children. For 2 years, nothing happened. We went to see specialists. The best, of course. Arthur insisted on it. We went through months of testing. She paused, the memory still raw. The results came back. The issue wasn't with me. It was with him. Arthur, he's sterile. A zoospermia, they called it. 0 sperm count. It was a result of a severe illness he had as a teenager. It was irreversible. Marcus's pen stopped moving. He stared at her, the full implication of her words dawning on him. He was devastated, Alara continued, not because he couldn't have children, but because of what it meant for his image, his masculinity. The great Arthur Sterling, the man who could build empires, was flawed. He made me swear I would never tell a soul. He paid the clinic in cash, used an alias for the final paperwork. He made it clear that if this ever got out, our marriage was over. So Liam and Chloe, Marcus prompted gently. We used a donor, Alara confirmed. An anonymous donor. We went to a fertility clinic in Philadelphia to be far away from anyone we knew. Arthur was there. He held my hand. He signed the consent forms. He chose to have these children with me. He celebrated when I got pregnant. He cried when Liam was born. They are his children in every way that matters. He is the only father they have ever known. A slow, grim smile spread across Marcus Thorne's face. It wasn't a smile of humor, but of dawning realization. It was the smile of a chess player who just realized his opponent had blindly walked into the most elegant trap on the board. My God, Alara, he breathed. The arrogance, the sheer unmitigated hubris of the man. He's counting on my silence, she said. He's built his entire strategy around the belief that I would rather be publicly shamed as an adulteress than reveal his secret, his weakness. He thinks I'll protect his ego even as he destroys me. And he is wrong, Marcus said, a new energy in his voice. He began scribbling notes furiously. This changes everything. This isn't just a defense, it's a canon. His demand for a paternity test is the most spectacular own goal in legal history. What do we do? Alara asked. We let him, Marcus replied, a glint in his eye. We agree to the paternity test. We let him swagger into court. We let him think he's about to deliver the killing blow. We give him all the rope he needs to hang himself, his reputation, and his entire case. He then laid out the legal strategy. It was a high-wire act. They would have to subpoena the records from the Philadelphia fertility clinic, a move that would be fought tooth and nail by Arthur's lawyers. They needed the original consent forms, the ones bearing Arthur's signature. There's a legal doctrine, Marcus explained, called paternity by estoppel. It essentially says that if a man holds himself out to be a child's father, supports the child, and builds a parental relationship, he can be legally prevented or stopped from denying paternity later, even if he's not the biological father. Arthur didn't just hold himself out as their father. He actively participated in their conception through assisted reproduction. To then claim they aren't his for financial gain, no judge in the country will look kindly on that. It's monstrous. For the first time in weeks, Alara felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. The next few weeks were a blur of legal maneuvers. As Marcus had predicted, Arthur's team, led by a notoriously aggressive lawyer named Robert Whitman, fought the subpoena for the clinic's records with everything they had. They filed motions to quash, citing privacy, claiming the request was a baseless fishing expedition. Meanwhile, Arthur's public relations war intensified. Tabloid articles appeared with grainy photos of Alara having coffee with a male friend from college years ago, the captions insinuating a long-running affair. Serafina posted cloying photos of herself with Arthur, with captions like, "Finally with my soulmate," and "Truth always wins." It was a psychological assault designed to break Alara down. But with Marcus in her corner, Alara found a strength she didn't know she possessed. She focused on her children, shielding them from the ugliness as best she could. She documented every smug post, every slanderous article, and she waited. Finally, after a heated battle, a senior judge granted Marcus's request. The fertility clinic was compelled to turn over its records, but under a strict seal. They would be delivered directly to the presiding judge in their divorce case, Judge Evelyn Reed, to be reviewed in camera, privately in her chambers. The day Marcus called to tell her the records had been secured was the day Alara knew she had a fighting chance. "The stage is set, Alara," Marcus told her over the phone. "He's still completely in the dark. His lawyers think the judge will look at the files, see it's a donor, and this will all go away quietly in a settlement conference. They have no idea we're going to let this play out in open court." The court date was set. Arthur Sterling, confident in his strategy and his power, was about to walk into his own personal reckoning. He thought he was the director, writer, and star of this drama. He had no idea the script had been flipped, and the final act belonged to his wife. The month leading up to the court date was the longest of Alara's life. It was a period of psychological warfare, waged not with armies, but with whispers, headlines, and the curated cruelty of social media. Arthur, insulated by his wealth and army of publicists, orchestrated a campaign designed to utterly dismantle Alara's reputation before she ever set foot in the courthouse. The first wave came from the tabloids. The Daily Chronicle and Gossip and Glamour, publications that had previously lauded Alara's elegance, now ran front-page stories with headlines like "The Billionaire's Betrayal Inside Alara Sterling's Secret Life." They were filled with quotes from insiders and former staff, all anonymous, all paid for. One story claimed she had a cold and calculating nature, another that she had married Arthur solely for his money and had been unhappy for years plotting her escape. A former housekeeper, who had been fired for theft, was quoted saying Alara was an absent mother, more interested in her charities than her own children. Each word was a poisoned dart. Then came the social media assault, masterfully executed by Serafina Vance. Her Instagram account became a running commentary on her triumph. She posted photos of herself redecorating parts of the Greenwich mansion. "Making this house a home again, new beginnings," she captioned one post showing new, garish furniture in the living room. She posted a photo of Arthur's favorite brand of whiskey on the nightstand with the caption, "Taking care of my man." But the most brutal posts were the ones that targeted Alara directly, without ever using her name. Serafina would post a thought of the day. "A woman's character is revealed by how she handles things she can't have." Another time she posted a video of herself playing with a golden retriever puppy. "Arthur got me the most precious gift. He said he wanted to fill the house with real, genuine love and loyalty." The implication was clear and venomous. The campaign worked. The world Arthur and Alara had once shared, a world of charity boards, gallery openings, and elite private schools, began to turn on her. Invitations to events dried up. Phone calls went unreturned. Mothers at Liam and Chloe's school, who had once been her friends, would now offer tight, pitying smiles and hurry away. They saw the headlines, they saw Serafina's posts, and they saw Arthur's confident silence. They drew their own conclusions. He was the powerful, wronged man. She was the greedy, unfaithful wife. Alara felt the isolation like a physical weight. Her world had shrunk to the walls of the small rented house Marcus had helped her secure, and the steadfast presence of her sister Catherine, who had flown in from Chicago to help. "Don't read it, Alara," Catherine would say, snatching her sister's phone away. "It's poison. It's exactly what he wants." But Alara couldn't always help it. In the dead of night, when the children were asleep and the house was silent, she would scroll through the comments. Thousands of them, from strangers all over the world, calling her a gold digger, a terrible mother, a disgrace. Arthur had successfully turned her into a villain in her own life story. Through it all, she maintained a quiet, powerful silence. Marcus had been adamant. Do not respond. Do not issue a statement. Do not engage. Let him build his tower of lies as high as he wants. The fall will be that much greater. So she focused inward. She became a fortress for her children. She helped Liam build a working miniature robot, celebrating with him when its tiny LED eyes lit up for the first time. She spent hours with Chloe, not just looking at her drawings, but helping her create entire storybooks, writing down the tales that went with her fantastical pictures. She protected their innocence fiercely, keeping the newspapers out of the house and limiting their internet access. They knew their parents were divorcing, a painful reality in itself, but they were shielded from the true venom of the conflict. One afternoon, Liam came home from school looking troubled. "A boy at school. His name is Ethan. He said you and Dad are in the news," Liam said, his voice small. "He said Dad is getting a new wife." Alara's heart clenched. She sat down with him at the kitchen table. "Liam, honey, your father and I are not going to be married anymore. That part is true. And sometimes, when people are famous, other people write stories about them that aren't kind and often aren't true. The only thing you need to know is that I love you and your father loves you. We will always, always be your parents." It was a half-truth, but it was the only one she could give him. The lie wasn't that Arthur loved him. The lie was that he was willing to sacrifice that love for the sake of his pride and his money. Behind the scenes, Marcus Thorne was waging his own silent war. He worked tirelessly, preparing for the hearing. He deposed Arthur's CFO, his personal assistants, and anyone who might have knowledge of his finances and his control over Alara. And most importantly, he prepared the presentation of the evidence from the fertility clinic. He knew he wouldn't just be arguing facts, he'd be telling a story. The day before the hearing, Alara met Marcus in his office. She was pale but composed. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" he asked gently. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "I'm terrified of seeing him, of seeing her, of all those cameras. I feel like I've already been judged and sentenced." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Yesterday, a courier from Whitman, Price and Gable delivered their final settlement offer. It was insulting. He offered you a one-time payment of $1 million, contingent on you relinquishing all claims, granting him sole custody, and signing a permanent ironclad NDA. He also attached the lab appointment for the paternity test. He's that confident, Alara. He thinks you're broken. He thinks you'll take the crumbs and disappear." "What did you say?" she asked. "I sent back a one-word response. See you in court." A small, determined smile touched Alara's lips. "Good. Tomorrow," Marcus said, his tone serious, "will be difficult. He will look at you. He will smile. He will have her on his arm. It is all a performance to make you feel small. But you have to remember, Alara, what is happening in that room. While he's playing for the cameras, Judge Reed will have that sealed envelope. While he's focused on his public image, we are focused on the truth. The loudest person in the room is often the most fragile. Your silence, your composure, that is your power. Let him have his circus. We're there for the main event." That night, Alara didn't sleep. She sat in the dark thinking about the past 15 years, the good times, the laughter, the shared dreams, and the slow, insidious decay. She thought about the moment she saw Liam's face for the first time, and the overwhelming love she felt. She thought of Arthur by her side, weeping with joy. How could that man become this monster? The answer was simple. His pride was more important than his love. His image was more valuable than his family. He had made his choice. And tomorrow in court, he would finally have to face the consequences of a decision he made so long ago. A decision he thought was buried forever. The storm had been gathering silently for years. The lightning was about to strike. The morning of the hearing dawned gray and overcast. The sky over New York City, a blanket of steel. It matched Alara's mood perfectly. Dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue dress, she looked not like a victim, but like a woman girded for battle. Her sister Catherine squeezed her hand as they got into the back of a town car Marcus had arranged. "Remember what he told you," Catherine said softly. "Dignity. Let that be your shield." The scene outside the New York County Courthouse was a media circus, just as Marcus had predicted. Paparazzi and news vans lined the street. The moment Alara stepped out of the car, she was hit by a barrage of flashing lights and shouted questions. "Alara, is it true you were unfaithful? Are you fighting the paternity test? Mrs. Sterling, any comment on the divorce?" She kept her eyes fixed forward, her expression serene, and walked up the steps with a quiet grace that seemed to infuriate the clamoring press. Marcus met her at the top, shielding her from the worst of the scrum and guiding her inside. The courtroom was already packed. It was a grand, wood-paneled room that felt heavy with the weight of 100 years of human drama. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Alara took her seat next to Marcus at the petitioner's table. She kept her gaze focused on the empty judge's bench, refusing to look at the other side of the room. Then he arrived. Arthur Sterling made his entrance like a king returning to his court. He was dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than Alara's car. He was smiling, a broad, confident, camera-ready smile. On his arm, clinging to him like a designer accessory, was Serafina Vance. She was wearing a tight, cream-colored dress, her makeup perfect, her expression a mask of smug satisfaction. They paused at the doorway, allowing the courtroom artists and photographers to get their shot. It was a calculated, brutal display of power and disrespect. As he walked towards his table, his eyes finally met Alara's across the room. The smile on his face widened slightly, a flicker of cruel amusement in his eyes. It was a look that said, "Look what I've done. Look how I've replaced you. You have nothing." Alara held his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. She remembered Marcus's words, "Dignity is your shield." She did not flinch. She did not look away. She simply gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement that held no fear, only resolve. The flicker of surprise in his eyes told her it had unsettled him. Arthur sat down next to his lawyer, Robert Whitman, a man who looked as sleek and predatory as a great white shark. Serafina took a seat in the front row of the gallery, directly in Alara's line of sight, and crossed her legs, a picture of unconcerned boredom. "All rise, Humphrey," the bailiff called out. Judge Evelyn Reed entered the room. She was a woman in her 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a reputation for being meticulous, fair, and utterly immune to the wealth or status of those who appeared before her. She settled into her high-backed chair and surveyed the room, her gaze lingering for a moment on the packed gallery before settling on the parties before her. On her bench, clear for all to see, was a single thick manila envelope. It was sealed. "We are here today for the preliminary hearing in the dissolution of marriage between Arthur Sterling and Alara Sterling," Judge Reed began, her voice crisp and authoritative. "I have reviewed the initial petitions. Mr. Whitman, let's begin with your client's primary assertion, which seems to be the linchpin of his entire financial and custodial claim, the matter of paternity." Robert Whitman stood up, smooth and polished. "Thank you, Your Honor. It is with great regret that my client, Mr. Sterling, has been forced to take this step. For some time, he has had grave concerns regarding the paternity of the 2 children born during the marriage, Liam and Chloe Sterling. We have filed a formal motion to compel a DNA paternity test, the results of which we believe will demonstrate that my client has no biological connection to the children and therefore no legal financial obligation." Judge Reed looked over at Marcus. "Mr. Thorne, your response?" Marcus stood. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Sterling, will not be contesting the request for a paternity test. In fact, we welcome it." A murmur went through the courtroom. Arthur leaned over and whispered something to his lawyer, a smirk playing on his lips. He thought this was a sign of surrender, that Alara knew the game was up. Serafina even let out a small, audible scoff from the gallery. Judge Reed banged her gavel lightly. Order. Very well. The court so orders a DNA test for Mr. Sterling and the two children to be conducted by a court-appointed lab. The results will be delivered directly to this court. She paused, her eyes locking onto Arthur. However, Mr. Sterling, before we proceed down that road, there is another matter I feel compelled to address. She picked up the sealed manila envelope. The room fell silent. I have in my possession, she said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more deliberate, sealed records from the Harrington Fertility Clinic of Philadelphia, subpoenaed by Mr. Thorne. These records pertain to medical treatments received by Mr. and Mrs. Sterling approximately 13 years ago. As they potentially have a profound bearing on the matter of paternity, I reviewed them in my chambers this morning. Arthur's smug expression faltered for the first time. A flicker of confusion, then annoyance crossed his face. He glanced at his lawyer, who looked equally blindsided. They had fought the subpoena, assuming it was a bluff, a desperate attempt to find something, anything. They never believed it would lead to anything concrete. Your Honor, Whitman interjected, rising to his feet, with all due respect, medical records of that nature are private. They are irrelevant to the central question of whether Mr. Sterling is the biological father. On the contrary, Mr. Whitman, Judge Reed countered, her gaze unwavering, I find them to be extraordinarily relevant. So relevant, in fact, that they might make the results of any new DNA test both predictable and, from a legal standpoint, moot. She did not open the envelope. She simply left it sitting on the bench, a symbol of the truth that was about to be unleashed. The air in the courtroom crackled with electricity. Arthur Sterling's confident smile was gone, replaced by a tight, strained line. The performance was over. The day of reckoning had truly begun. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Every eye was on Judge Evelyn Reed and the sealed envelope that lay before her, like a judgment waiting to be passed. Arthur Sterling's face, usually a mask of controlled charisma, was now a canvas of barely suppressed panic. He kept shooting venomous looks at Ilara, as if trying to command her silence through sheer force of will. But Ilara's gaze was fixed on the judge, her posture radiating a calm that seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst could. Mr. Sterling, Judge Reed began, her voice cutting through the tension, your petition is based on the claim that you have reason to believe you are not the children's father. Can you please elaborate for the court what those reasons are? Whitman stood up quickly. Your Honor, my client would prefer not to cast aspersions on Mrs. Sterling's character in open court. We believe the DNA test will speak for itself. It was a slick attempt to sound magnanimous while insinuating infidelity. I'm sure you would, Judge Reed replied dryly, but the court is asking your client directly. Mr. Sterling, on what grounds are you leveling this very serious allegation? Forced to speak, Arthur stood up. He adjusted his suit jacket, trying to recapture his earlier swagger. Your Honor, he started, his voice smooth but lacking its earlier confidence. Over the past few years, my wife, Ilara, became distant, cold. Her behavior led me to question many things about our marriage, including her fidelity. It is a painful conclusion to have reached, but a necessary one. He risked a glance at the gallery, playing for sympathy. Serafina nodded slightly, a supportive look plastered on her face. Judge Reed listened patiently until he finished. Then she picked up the envelope. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. That was very diplomatic. She began to tear open the seal. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. These records from the fertility clinic tell a different story, she said, pulling out a thick sheaf of papers. They detail a series of consultations and treatments for a couple struggling with infertility. The male patient, using the alias Mr. Smith, but whose identity is confirmed by a notarized photograph and signature on file, was diagnosed with non-obstructive azoospermia. She paused, letting the medical term hang in the air. For the benefit of those in the room not versed in reproductive medicine, that means a zero sperm count, a condition of complete and irreversible male sterility. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Robert Whitman's face went pale. He looked at his client, his eyes wide with disbelief and fury. Arthur Sterling stood frozen, his face ashen. The blood had drained from it, leaving behind a waxy gray pallor. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Judge Reed wasn't finished. She held up a specific document. This is a consent form for assisted reproduction using an anonymous sperm donor. It outlines the process, the legal ramifications, and the parental rights and responsibilities of the intended parents. It is signed on every page. One signature belongs to Alara Sterling. The other, she said, her eyes boring into Arthur, belongs to you, Mr. Sterling. She slid the document under the courtroom's projector. The image of the signature page filled the screens mounted on the walls. There it was, in clear, bold ink. Arthur Sterling. Undeniable. So let me see if I understand the timeline, Judge Reed continued, her voice dripping with controlled contempt. You discovered you were sterile. You and your wife then made the loving choice to build a family through a donor. You signed the consent forms. You participated in the process. You were present for the births of these two beautiful children. You raised them, gave them your name, and held them out to the world as your own for 12 and 10 years, respectively. She leaned forward. And now, because you wish to avoid your financial responsibilities in this divorce and embark on a new life with your mistress, you come into my courtroom and publicly demand a paternity test you know you will fail. You are willing to brand your wife an adulteress and emotionally devastate your own children by revealing their biological origins in the most brutal way imaginable, all to protect your fortune. Have I summarized the situation correctly, Mr. Sterling? Arthur Sterling was unraveling. The titan of industry, the master of the universe, was shrinking before their very eyes. A sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. This is, a violation of my privacy. This is a lie, he stammered, his voice a hoarse, desperate croak. A lie? Judge Reed's voice was like ice. Are you claiming this is not your signature, Mr. Sterling? Because we can bring in a handwriting expert right now. Or perhaps you'd like to hear from Dr. Alistair Finch from the Harrington Clinic, who signed an affidavit, also in this file, stating that he personally consulted with you and Mrs. Sterling, and that you were, in his words, fully informed and enthusiastic participants in the process. Checkmate. The room erupted into a flurry of frantic whispers. In the front row, Seraphina Vance's mask of smugness had shattered. She stared at Arthur, her perfectly made-up face a mixture of horror and disgust. This wasn't the powerful, wronged man she had attached herself to. This was a fraud, a cruel, pathetic liar. Her dream of becoming the next Mrs. Sterling, with access to unlimited wealth, was evaporating in the harsh light of the courtroom. Robert Whitman, realizing his client had not only lied to him, but had walked him into a professional minefield, slowly sank into his chair, looking utterly defeated. But the final, most devastating moment came from Alara. Throughout the entire revelation, she had remained silent, a portrait of quiet strength. Now Marcus Thorne stood up. Your Honor, he said, his voice ringing with clarity, given these revelations, we are filing a motion for summary judgment on the issue of paternity, based on the doctrine of paternity by estoppel. Furthermore, we are filing a separate civil suit against Mr. Sterling for intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, and abuse of process. His actions were not just a legal tactic, they were a malicious campaign designed to destroy my client and traumatize her children. We will be seeking punitive damages commensurate with his vast fortune. Arthur finally snapped. He whipped his head around to glare at Alara, his face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. You, he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at her. You were supposed to be silent. You promised. Alara met his gaze, and for the first time, she spoke, her voice clear and steady, carrying across the silent courtroom. My silence was to protect our family, Arthur, she said, but you destroyed that family. My promise did not extend to helping you abandon your children. Her words, simple and true, were the final blow. Arthur Sterling, the billionaire who thought he could buy and control everything, had been brought down not by a complex legal strategy, but by a simple truth he had tried to bury. He staggered back, looking around the room at the sea of shocked and disgusted faces. He saw his lawyer's contempt, his mistress's horror, and the judge's unyielding stare. The world he had so carefully constructed had crumbled into dust around him. The gavel fell, but its sound was swallowed by the immediate eruption of chaos in the courtroom. Arthur Sterling stood, frozen in the wreckage of his life, as reporters scrambled over benches, shouting his name. The flash of cameras was no longer flattering and celebratory, but predatory and relentless, capturing every detail of his public evisceration. His face, once a symbol of untouchable power, was now a mask of slack-jawed disbelief and impotent rage. He turned, searching for an ally, a friendly face, anything to anchor him in the swirling vortex of his downfall. His eyes landed on Serafina. She was already on her feet, but she wasn't moving toward him. Her face, a mask of calculated horror, was turned away as she pushed through the crowd, her only goal to get to an exit, to distance herself from the radioactive fallout of his disgrace. He called her name, a desperate hoarse sound, but she never looked back. The transactional nature of their relationship was laid bare. He was no longer an asset, but a liability she was liquidating with ruthless speed. Flanked by a beleaguered security detail, Arthur was bundled out a side door of the courthouse and into a waiting town car. The short journey was a blur of faces pressed against the glass, phones held aloft, recording his shame. He wasn't just a man going through a divorce. He was a public spectacle, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and mocked on social media before he even reached his hotel. The days that followed were a systematic dismantling of his empire. His phone, once a constant stream of calls from world leaders and market movers, fell silent. His emergency board meeting for Ether Dynamics was not a consultation, but an execution. The men who had once fawned over his every word now looked at him with cold, appraising eyes. They spoke of brand integrity, shareholder confidence, and leadership instability. They weren't just concerned about the company, they were disgusted by the man. Within a week, a press release announced that Arthur Sterling was taking an indefinite leave of absence. Everyone knew it was a permanent exile. The Titan had been toppled, not by a market crash or a corporate raider, but by his own breathtaking arrogance. For Ilara, the aftermath was a different kind of whirlwind. It was a deluge of relief, exhaustion, and the dawning, terrifying reality of true freedom. The first few days were a blur of calls from Marcus, finalizing legal details and fielding messages from people who had abandoned her, but were now crawling back with sycophantic congratulations. She ignored them all. Her focus was singular: her children. The most difficult conversation of her life took place in the quiet living room of their rented house. She sat with Liam and Chloe, the three of them curled together on the sofa. With Marcus's guidance and the help of a child psychologist, she found the words. She explained that families are built from love, not just biology. She told them that their father, the man who had raised them, had been so excited to have them that he had needed a special doctor's help to make it happen. She was honest about his anger and the sad choices he was making, but she framed it carefully, protecting them from the true depth of his malice. Liam, ever the logical one, was quiet for a long time. So, there's a man out there who is biologically related to me? He asked, processing it like a science problem. Yes, Ilara said gently. But he's a stranger, honey. Your father is the man who taught you to ride a bike and helped you build your first circuit board. That's what makes a dad. Chloe, more attuned to emotion, simply buried her face in her mother's side. Is he still going to be our dad? She whispered. Ilara's heart ached. In his heart, I hope he always will be. But he's going to be living far away for a while. For now, it's just going to be the three of us. And we are going to be okay. The sale of the Greenwich estate was the next crucial step. Ilara walked through its cavernous, silent rooms one last time. She didn't feel sadness, but a profound sense of release. This wasn't a home. It was the museum of a life that was never truly hers. She instructed the movers to pack only their personal belongings, the children's toys, her books, the photo albums from the early happy years. The rest, the designer furniture, the expensive art Arthur had bought as investments, the opulent fixtures, was to be sold. It was a cleansing, a deliberate shedding of a heavy gilded skin. With the settlement secured, she didn't look for another palace. She looked for a home. She found it in a quiet, green corner of Connecticut. A sprawling, light-filled house with large windows, a welcoming kitchen, and a magnificent old oak tree in the backyard. It had character and warmth, two things the Sterling mansion had always lacked. It was during this transition, sifting through letters and messages, that the idea for her next chapter was born. A letter arrived, written by hand, from a woman in another state. The woman had read about Alara's case and was trapped in a similar situation, facing a wealthy, controlling husband who was using the legal system to terrorize her. "Your story gave me hope," she wrote. "You made me feel like it's possible to fight back." That letter was a spark. Alara realized her ordeal could be more than just a personal victory. It could be a catalyst. She met with Marcus, not as a client, but as a founder. Together, they sketched out the framework for the Phoenix Foundation, an organization with a dual mission: to provide top-tier legal aid for women in high-conflict, financially abusive divorces, and to offer the psychological support needed to rebuild a life from the ashes. Months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Marcus visited her at the new house. He found her not in a sterile sitting room, but in the backyard, her hands covered in rich soil, a basket of daffodil bulbs beside her. Chloe was laughing on a newly installed swing, and Liam was on the patio, explaining the schematics of his latest robotic creation to his patient dog. The scene was a portrait of peaceful, vibrant life. "The final papers," Marcus said, handing her a folder, but his eyes were on the scene around them. "It's all officially done." "Thank you, Marcus," she said, her smile genuine and relaxed. "For everything." "I saw the news," he said gently. "Arthur sold his last block of Ether Dynamics stock. He's officially out. Rumor is he bought a private island, a gilded cage of his own making." Alara looked down at the pale, firm bulb in her hand. A year ago, the news of Arthur's final defeat might have brought a surge of vindication. Now it barely registered. He was a ghost from another life. Her energy was here, in the present, in the act of creation. "I heard from the Foundation's first official client today," Marcus added. "The woman who wrote to you. We found a pit bull of a lawyer for her in Ohio. They've managed to freeze her husband's assets pending a full financial disclosure. She said to tell you, thank you." A true, deep joy filled Alara's heart. This was the real victory. Not the money, not the house, but this, the ability to turn her pain into someone else's power. "Good," she whispered, placing a bulb into the cool earth. "That's good," Chloe called out. "Mom, look, I can touch the sky." Alara looked up, shielding her eyes against the bright afternoon sun. Her daughter was a silhouette against the brilliant blue, swinging freely, joyfully, without a care in the world. She wasn't just touching the sky, she was flying. And for the first time in a very long time, so was her mother. And so Alara's story comes to a close. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest strength isn't found in wealth or public image, but in quiet dignity and the courage to speak the truth, even when your voice shakes. Arthur Sterling thought his power was absolute, but he forgot that integrity has a power all its own. Alara's victory wasn't just for her, it was for every person who has ever been made to feel small, silenced, or controlled. She didn't just win her freedom, she reclaimed her narrative. What did you think of Arthur's stunning downfall? Could you believe his arrogance? What would you have done in Alara's position? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and resilience moved you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And for more incredible true-life dramas and tales of triumph, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what we have in store. Thank you for listening,